We are taught to measure a person's worth in gold, in land, in things the eye can see. But we forget that some souls are heavy, not with sin, but with a kindness that has found no home. Our story today begins with such a soul. Imagine the untamed West, where the wind carries not just dust, but cruel judgment. On a rickety wooden platform, under a sky the color of lead, a woman stands. The last one. Around her is not the silence of compassion, but the silence of contempt. She is not being bought. She is being priced. And the question we will answer together tonight is not who will buy her, but rather, within a form the world has rejected, within a heart the world has scorned, is there enough strength to build a home from nothing at all? Join me, and listen to the story of Clara May. Colorado Territory, 1882. The wind didn't just blow. It mourned, carrying the biting cold of coming snow down from the mountains. It crept through the withered grass and into the soul of the muddy town. The sky was a sheet of old pewter, pressing down on everything. In the center of it all, encircled by curious and contemptuous eyes, she was the last one. The other women had been claimed. Now, only she remained on the auction block, an island in a sea of men. Her worn shawl could not hide her wide shoulders or the fullness of her form. A solid, steady presence that seemed to challenge the brittle standards of the world around her. No one reached for a coin. Instead, they traded in snickers and whispers as sharp as knives. Looks like two women stuffed into one dress. You buy her, you'd better reinforce your bed frame. Clara did not flinch. She did not allow herself to tremble. She simply stood, her spine a fortress, her chin lifted not in defiance, but in a state of weathered calm. Her gaze passed through the crowd, not with pride, but with a practiced emptiness. She had heard worse words than these. They were just meaningless sounds, unable to touch the quiet place inside where she kept what was left of herself. The auctioneer, weary and embarrassed, cleared his throat. Clara May Jenkins, 23. Hardworking, good in the kitchen. $1. Anyone. The silence that answered was heavy and mocking. A man tossed a rusty button into the mud. That's all she's worth. Just as the laughter was about to erupt again, a voice cut through it all. A voice that wasn't loud, but carried the weight of stone. $2. All sounds ceased. Every head turned toward the end of the street. Jedediah Cole. A silent shadow the town knew and yet didn't know at all. The man who lived in isolation out past the ridge, who only came to town for nails, who wore his loneliness like a second coat. His eyes met no one else's. They were fixed on the figure on the block. The auctioneer blinked, as if waking from a dream. Sold. Clara stepped down. Her boots sank into the cold mud, a familiar feeling. She did not look back at the crowd, nor did she offer a smile to the man who had bought her. She only asked, her voice nearly lost to the wind, "Where to?" Jedediah didn't answer. He simply tipped his hat toward the waiting mule cart. A silent command. She followed, her solid form receding until the town forgot her completely. The road out of town was a path of silence. It was not an awkward silence, but one shared by two people who understood desolation. The rattle of the cart was the only sound breaking the stillness of the vast, empty land that stretched to the horizon. Clara looked out at the barren landscape and saw her own inner emptiness reflected back at her. When they arrived at the ranch at dusk, she understood. The place was a mirror of the man beside her. The leaning fence was a sigh. The hanging barn door was a slumped shoulder. The house was gray and solitary, as if it had given up on ever waiting for a coat of paint or the sound of laughter. It was not a home. It was a place of survival. As she stepped inside, a coldness rose not just from the floorboards but from the air itself. It smelled of old dust and something even older. Absence. And then she saw it. The table set for one, with a single chair pulled up to it. A monument to solitude. "This is it," Jedediah said, the words as spare as the room. "You'll take this room." She only nodded. She understood. Later, by the flickering light of an oil lamp, she unpacked her bag. And when the few items were laid out, the spare dress, the sewing kit, the tattered book, she carefully removed the last thing. A faded photograph, its corners softened from countless touches. In it, two dark-eyed little girls were laughing, pressed close to a much thinner version of herself. Her callous thumb stroked the surface in a silent, secret ritual. She whispered into the quiet room, a promise meant only for the ghosts in the photo and for herself. "Mama's still here. Still trying." Outside, Jedediah sat on the porch, his pipe the only ember of light in the vast darkness. He did not know, and neither did she, that the woman he had brought home didn't just carry a silent past, but also the uncanny ability to spark a fire where only ashes remained. The morning began without words. Weak, gray light filtered through the frosted panes, falling across the worn floorboards. Clara had been up since before dawn. There was something about a new place that pulled her from sleep, as if her body refused to trust that peace would last. When Jedediah emerged from his room, the scent of biscuits filled the small cabin. She did not greet him. He did not expect her to. He simply stood for a moment, his gaze falling on the plate she had set on the table. Two thick biscuits, split and steaming, alongside a pot of coffee and slices of smoked meat she'd found. He sat and ate in silence. She stood by the window, sipping her own coffee. When he was finished, he rose. "Got to check the fence on the north slope. Mule's out back if you need anything in town." She nodded. "I'll clean. See about the pantry." He paused at the door. "You don't have to cook." "I know," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Then he was gone. She worked all morning, her sleeves rolled high. The cabin hadn't been truly cleaned in months, perhaps years. But as she scrubbed, she found smaller signs of a life that had been here before. A child's hair ribbon tucked behind a chest of drawers. A single, small shoe under the bed that did not belong to a grown man. She did not ask. She simply worked, letting the cold, clean air sweep through the open windows. She saw him return at dusk. He didn't wave, but he paused on the threshold when the smell of bubbling stew reached him. "I hope you eat beef," she said. There was a sack of potatoes under the floorboard. He nodded once. "I do." They ate together again, but this time she sat across from him. "You have children?" she asked. His hand paused over his spoon. His eyes did not lift from his bowl. "No," he said. Then, after a long moment, "Not anymore." She didn't press. She simply passed him the cornbread. Later that night, as she touched the faded photograph before blowing out the lamp, she whispered, "Mama's still here. Still trying." It was a Tuesday when Jedediah returned with the children. Clara was in the small garden, pulling the last of the yellowed carrots from the hard earth when she saw the wagon. 4 children sat in the back, silent and still. The oldest, a boy of about 10, clutched the side rail with a white-knuckled grip. The smallest, a girl no older than 4, had her thumb in her mouth, her eyes like dark, fearful puddles. "They're from the old mission house," he said at last. They were left. No one came. Clara looked from the children to him. "What do you want done?" He scratched the back of his neck. "They'll sleep in the loft. I'll build bunks." She nodded once, set down her carrots, and walked toward them. She knelt in the dirt, her presence solid and calm. "You like stew?" she asked the oldest boy. He blinked. She gestured to the house. Come on in. It's warm inside. That night, the cabin changed. There were 6 bowls on the table. Clara portioned the stew evenly, mashing the pieces for the little one. Jedediah sat back, quieter than usual, watching. After supper, Clara tucked the children into makeshift beds in the loft. She gave the youngest girl the corner of her own pillowcase, stitched long ago with blue thread. In the deep silence after the fire had settled to embers, she heard the boy whisper, "Why'd you take us?" Jedediah's low voice came from the shadows. Because no one else did. By the end of the week, Clara had tacked their names above their bunks. Elijah, Ruthie, Micah, and Susanna. She hummed as she worked, and soon the youngest began to hum along. Micah, the quiet one, followed her everywhere, watching her hands, her face. "You cook like a mama," he told her one day by the well. She blinked. "Well, that's something, isn't it?" The whispers in town began again. They'd heard about the fat bride, and now they talked about the orphans. "She's playing house out of nothing," one woman sneered. "She's got the hips for motherhood, that's for sure," another laughed unkindly. But one person didn't laugh. Reverend Markham came to the ranch one Sunday, hat in hand. The children sat neatly on the porch step. "You've taken on a heavy burden," he said to Clara. She shook her head. "Not a burden. Just hungry mouths. And I've got hands that know how to feed." That night, Jedediah stood in the doorway as she patched a shirt for Micah. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said. She didn't look up from her sewing. "Neither did you." The silence that followed was not one of distance, but of shared understanding. Clara no longer thought about being laughed at. She was too busy making sure the children had warm socks. For the Sunday service, she dressed the children in their cleanest clothes and walked with them to the church, a line of small ducks behind her. The pews creaked under the weight of staring eyes. But when it was time for hymns, little Ruthie, all of 6 years old, stood up. She sang "Jesus Loves Me Alone." Her voice, soft and lisping at first, grew stronger as Clara nodded encouragement. The entire church was silent when she finished. An old woman in the back whispered a single, heartfelt amen. Afterward, people didn't laugh. They didn't smile either. But they looked a little longer, not at Clara's waistline, but at the children. One woman stopped her and pressed a pair of small, knitted mittens into her hand. "Had extras," she mumbled. That evening, Jedediah waited on the porch. When Ruthie ran to him, he scooped her up. "How was church?" "They said I sing real good," she chirped. "I bet you did." He looked over at Clara as she approached, her steps tired but her face calm. "You did good," he said to her. Later, when she lit the lamp, she noticed something new by the fireplace. 4 wooden pegs had been driven into the wall, one for each child's coat. They hadn't been there that morning. The wind that night came with a warning, moaning through the eaves. Clara felt a restlessness in her chest, a feeling that something was about to come loose. By noon the next day, the wind was sharp as needles. Jedediah was in the barn with Elijah and Micah, reinforcing the roof beams. Clara had just pulled bread from the oven when she heard it. A sharp crack of splitting timber, followed by a terrible whump. The wind carried the wrong kind of smoke. She ran to the window and saw it. Orange licking at the back of the barn wall. Fire. She didn't scream. She moved. Out the door, skirts clutched in her hands, she ran across the muddy yard. Jedediah was already there, pulling the boys away from the flames. But the barn was going too fast. And Ruthie. God, Ruthie had followed them. The little girl stood frozen at the threshold, her arms raised toward the terrified horses inside. "Ruthie!" Clara shouted, but the girl didn't move. Jedediah lunged but slipped in the mud. Clara didn't hesitate. She charged into the heat, her skirts brushing flames, her apron catching an ember that she slapped away with a searing palm. She reached the girl, scooped her up, shielded her small face, and turned back just as a section of the roof groaned above them. They made it out seconds before it collapsed. Jedediah caught her as her knees gave out in the mud. He carried her into the house without a word, his arms wrapped around her as if she weighed nothing at all. He set her on the bed, smoke still curling from her sleeves. "It wasn't your fault," Clara coughed, stroking Elijah's hair as he sobbed. "She was just scared." Jedediah brought a basin of water. Clara's arms were red and blistering, but she made no sound as she pressed a cool cloth to Ruthie's forehead, and then to her own burned hands. By nightfall, the barn was mostly gone. Later, as only embers glowed in the firebox, Jedediah sat on the floor beside her. "You ran into fire," he said softly. "I didn't think. I just ran. She calls you Ma now." "I know. You didn't have to be the one to go." She finally looked at him, her eyes soft and rimmed with red. "No," she said. "But I'm the one she reached for." When he stood to leave, he left a small, carved wooden figure on the floor beside her, the rough shape of a mother holding a child. She clutched it as she rocked Ruthie to sleep that night. Word spread through town. How the fat bride had run into a burning barn. How she came out with a child in her arms. Some called it foolish. Some called it heroic. But no one laughed anymore. At the mercantile, Mrs. Downing packed extra flour in her sack without charging. Someone left fresh bread on their cart. At the cabin, Clara didn't speak of the pain. And when Micah slipped a new drawing onto her table, a picture of their house, 5 stick figures, and a flame with a heart drawn through it, she didn't cry. She just touched it and whispered, "We're still standing." Spring came slowly, melting the snow and revealing patches of soft green. Inside the cabin, life had found a new rhythm. The children had chores they took on with purpose. Jedediah rebuilt the barn, with Elijah working steadfastly at his side. The boy's shoulders were still narrow, but his back was straight. One afternoon, Clara found Jedediah hammering something by the front door. He stepped aside. On a piece of sanded cedar, he had carved 4 names in careful, uneven letters. Elijah, Ruthie, Micah, Susanna. He handed her the knife. "You should add yours." Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. She knelt and carved her name beneath the others, her strokes as steady as a heartbeat. Clara May. She left a space beside it. That evening, they sat together on the porch swing Jedediah had repaired. "Why haven't you carved yours yet?" Micah asked him. Jedediah looked up at Clara, then at the children. "I was waiting to see if it was my place." Clara laid a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's your house, Jed." He shook his head. "It wasn't a home until you named it." Later that night, Clara found the front door ajar. She stepped outside. The name board was still there, and now, carved just beneath hers in strong, clean lines, was one more name: Jed. Life on the small ranch grew more whole. One afternoon, Micah brought her a new sketch of a cabin surrounded by trees. In the yard, 6 stick figures stood in a line. "This is our family," he said quietly. "Who's the tall one with the big hands?" Clara asked, her eyes soft. Micah grinned. "That's Pa. I figured he ought to be in it now." That night, Jedediah lingered by the door after the children were in bed. "I thought you might leave after the fire," he said. She looked up, amused. "And go where? I've never had my name carved into a porch before." He stepped closer. "You gave them a mother." She shook her head. "They gave me something to mother." His voice dropped to a whisper. And me. You, she said, her smile soft and rooted, gave me a place to stay. Then one morning, Clara didn't wake up. The fire had burned low, and a gentle rain tapped against the windows. The children rose quietly, as if they knew. Micah pushed her door open. She lay peacefully under her quilt, one hand over her chest, the other curled around one of his crumpled drawings. Jedediah buried her the next day on the hill behind the cabin, under a budding cottonwood tree. The whole town came. They came not out of spectacle, but out of shame, and something softer, too. The preacher didn't have to say much, because the children did. She came when no one else did, Elijah said, his voice clear. She didn't ask where we came from. She just made room. Ruthie tugged on Jedediah's sleeve. Can I sing the song? He nodded. And there, under the wide sky, the little girl sang Jesus Loves Me, her voice floating over the grave like a prayer. The townspeople cried, not for her size or her strangeness, but because they had finally seen what love looked like in a woman who had only ever given it. The next morning, Jedediah carved one last name into the porch board, beneath hers. No dates, no titles. Just, Ma. The children gathered stones from the creek and laid them around her grave. By midsummer, marigolds and lavender bloomed there, tended by small hands. Every evening, Jedediah sat on the porch, the children around him, telling the stories she once told. They laughed sometimes, and when they did, it was warm. Like stew. Like an old apron. Like a home made from second chances. Clara May Jenkins came to Dry Creek last. No one wanted her. But she was the first to be called Ma, and the only one they never forgot.